For more than a decade, sarcasm and condescension were my primary classroom management tools. Hi, I'm Mark Barnes, and this is another edition of the Hack Learning Podcast, and today we are hacking classroom management. In the open, you heard a quote from an article I wrote back in 2014 called 5 Classroom Management Tips That Will Work at Any School, and that was on my blog called Brilliant or Insane. And that post became very popular, and there was some pushback on it. But I'd like to share these classroom management tips with you in this podcast because I think classroom management is something we have to hack because too many teachers continue to use the old school way, and it really doesn't work. I hear often teachers who complain that they can't be effective in the classroom, they can't run a student-centered sort of chaotic classroom where kids are up and around and doing things because they're just out of control, they say. And when I engage in conversation about this and say, well, tell me what you're doing, oftentimes I get a lot of these things that I suggest in this blog post that we shouldn't do. And I'd like to share those with you now. And I think this is a good way to hack classroom management, is to look at the things that some tips that will work at any school regarding classroom management. So number one is never use a list of do's and don'ts. Many teachers still begin the school year with this lengthy do and don't list. And what we do is we walk in, kids come in the first day, there's trepidation already. They don't know what to expect from their teacher. They don't know if they're going to like their teacher, and they don't know what their teacher's going to think of them. Is the teacher going to be mean? Is the person going to remember my name or care about me? And there's a lot of research that indicates that this feeling that these kids have, this, trepidation, can really set the tone for a negative school year. So they walk in and they're already nervous, especially younger kids. And if we begin with, okay, here are the rules, we're going to do this and we're not going to do that. Sit in your chair. Don't stand up. Don't get up without permission. Don't raise your hand. This creates a lot of anxiety for kids, really of all ages. It's best to steer clear of this as much as possible because the do's and the don'ts have to be followed by consequences. So right away, the kid thinks, okay, well, if I get out of my seat, maybe I forget and I get up without permission, what happens to me? What's the consequence? And then with consequence really comes walls, these walls between the teacher and the student that really only make things worse. So the best thing we can do is to stay away from do's and don'ts because we want to build a community of enthusiastic, cooperative learners. And as soon as we have do's and don'ts and consequences, we put this at risk. So never use do's and don'ts. Tip number 2 for hacking classroom management: throw out the assertive discipline handbook. You heard in the open, I was talking about sarcasm, which we're going to get to in a minute. And when I used negative things and I thought this doesn't work, then I thought, well, maybe I'll try assertive discipline because it was so popular. The thing is, if you're from the school of assertive discipline, where let's say you want to use gold stars and you want to put names on the boards, this is really something, again, that goes back to the do's and the don'ts. Only what we try to do is spin it and say, well, if I notice you doing something well, I'm going to give you a reward. And if I notice you doing something not good, I'm going to put your name on the board. And that's an indication that I'm watching you. We need to stay away from this because it's the same as the do's and the don'ts, and it really doesn't help. If students need rewards to collaborate, to work cooperatively, to engage in class activities, then there's a chance that the problem is really with the activity, not with the students. And that's another problem that I hear often from teachers is, the issue with engagement. So one of the things we want to do is look at our activities first. And that's sort of the bedrock of this whole idea of hacking classroom management is if we're doing things in the classroom that are exciting, kids will be too engaged to really be disruptive. Tip number 3 is to eliminate sarcasm and condescension. Again, going back to the open, it didn't work for me. I tried assertive discipline. It didn't work. So what I did is I moved away from that altogether. Especially with, you get to middle school, and I taught mostly in middle school. Teens do not respond well to sarcasm. Most people don't. Again, it's not a good practice. I think it's a crutch. Often teachers, especially young or maybe inexperienced teachers, get drawn into sort of a back and forth with kids, and it's easy to go to sarcasm. You got kids in the classroom going, "Ooh, he got you," or the student says something and you go, "Ooh, the student got the teacher," and this really is going to only head to a bad place. So stay away from sarcasm as much as you can. It's always better to use courtesy with kids, to pull them aside, to tell them that you're there for them. Sarcasm won't work. Get rid of it. Tip number 4, let's stop enforcing the silly rules. I mean, really, we want to stay away from rules altogether, do's and don'ts. We want to create a guidelines. We want to create mutual respect. We want to talk to kids about boundaries. What works, what doesn't work. That is so much better than the do's and the don'ts. And the silly rules. We've got so many silly rules in school. And a lot of these may be mandated from, leadership, from the administration, from a student handbook. No gum chewing. Don't get out of your seat. Don't talk out of turn. Leave your mobile device at home or in your locker. You can't listen to music. No sleeping in class. Well, guess what? If the student's sleeping in class, once again, there's most likely an issue with what the teacher is doing in the classroom. I wrote in this article, when I was teaching, water bottles weren't allowed in class. And some of my 7th graders like to bring water. So, I ignored the water bottles. And I didn't say, hey, you can bring the water bottles, because a lot of people will push back and say, well, if it's in the handbook, if it's a rule, I can't break it because, that's going against school policy. And maybe you don't want to do that, but you can't ignore it. Kids would bring the water bottles in, and if a student said, hey, wait a minute, we're allowed to bring water bottles, I might not say you're allowed to. I would just say, let's just, not spill it. Or I would sort of change the subject. And the kids are pretty intuitive, and they would catch on. So, the silly rules, I might never say you can chew gum or you can do this or you can do something that's, in the student handbook that you're not allowed to do. I just sort of ignore it, and it really helps to create a better community. And tip number 5, speaking of community, is build a community. And again, I say in this article, it took me far too long to figure out that classroom wasn't a private domain filled with 25 prisoners that I could manipulate. It needs to be a community. We're all there for the same reason, for teaching and learning. We need to take control out of it. And as soon as we do that, as soon as you talk to kids, as soon as you engage them and say, we're here to learn, and that can be fun. We're here to have fun as well. And I want you to be a part of it. And let's set boundaries together. And if things are going wrong, let's work through that together, because we're a community of learners. When you do that, things really will change for the better in your classroom. And you'll find that classroom management becomes something that's really simple. And really, we shouldn't have to manage behavior. Classroom management's okay. That is managing the things that are going on, the activities, the projects, the grouping of kids, getting kids to transition from one activity to the next, or to talk about using devices or computers or anything at all that makes kids want to learn. And that's the only kind of management we should be doing. It shouldn't be behavior management. And all too often when we say classroom management, we think behavior management. But if we can remember these 5 simple tips, Never use do's and don'ts. Throw out assertive discipline. Eliminate sarcasm. Stop enforcing silly rules. And build a community. When you do this, things will improve and you will have a rich, exciting, fun teaching and learning environment. I'd love to hear what you have to say about these 5 tips and any tips of your own for creating an amazing community of independent learners at your school. So please feel free to share your thoughts at #HackLearning on Twitter and at hacklearning.org. And as always, check out our library of Hack Learning books at hacklearningbooks.com. See you next time.